All right, it looks like it's 11 o'clock. I hope you can hear me. We're going to go ahead and get started. On the call with me today is Mr. Dusty Bates, the one and only. Say
How's
hello,
it going?
Dusty.
Hey guys, how's it going? Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to everyone. I hope it's going to be an awesome year. And if you're getting into commercial real estate for the first time, then I know it's going to be an interesting year for you. I remember my first year when I got in, and Dusty, I'm sure you remember your first year.
That was actually it was kind of rough for me. I actually didn't have a teacher. I didn't have anyone teaching me. I just kind of trial by fire, as it were. So it wasn't an exciting. Well, it was an exciting year, but could have been better.
Hey, your first commercial deal, that was a portfolio of what was that, duplexes? Is that what that was?
That was 33 units, 33 properties in Sacramento as a portfolio. We tell this story all the time because it hurts. Stops me from making a mistake again. 33 units. I think the sale price was like 2 million, 2,050,000. And I got paid about $3,000
Ouch.
of that. I should have been paid about 70. And the other agent taught me a lesson about how commercial real estate works and sent me packing with $3,000 after a long
How long
time.
did you spend on that, Dusty?
We started about July or August, and it actually closed just before the end of the year. And I spent a lot of time on that, working through that, because that's 33 properties, that's 33 sets of disclosures. You have to disclose every single one of those. You have to walk through every single one of those because even though it's a commercial deal, I mean, it's a lot of properties, kind of considered commercial in the eyes of the law and Bureau of Real Estate. You have to treat them as single-family homes because they're all the parcels were less than 5 units. So it was a lot of work.
That's a lot of disclosure. You probably had a couple reams worth of paper on that one.
Yep.
Well, luckily, when I got started in the commercial, I just walked literally downstairs from Keller Williams to KW Commercial, and met up with Steve, and he convinced me to join the dark side, and join commercial since I had a client who wanted to purchase about 20 units or so. So I was lucky to have some help with that. When that client actually didn't work out, I discovered he wanted something that wasn't actually available in the market, and I was spinning my wheels for a year and a half trying to find this elusive deal for him. But yeah, that's how. What was that? I think that's how I started 2012, 2011. Yeah.
Well, that's something we've got a list of questions here, and that kind of plays into that first one we were looking at, where it says, what is the best way to secure a listing, and where can I find buyers and sellers? What do I need to have prepared when I sit down for a listing or a buying appointment? And that kind of plays into that because I want to talk about the sphere of influence that you have as an agent. You go out there and you're at open houses, you're trying to sell single-family homes or duplexes, and you have a sphere of influence around you of those commercial buyers and sellers. And in a little bit, I think hopefully we've got a guest coming on, Cindy. She's one of the students, and she's actually going to be a live guest with us, and we're going to interview her about her experiences. She actually had that same experience where she was like, where do I find buyers and sellers? And she actually found a family next door to her. Right next door to her is a family that all they do is they buy commercial properties. That's how they make their living. And right next door, I don't know if she actually babysit the kids or not, but we can ask her when she gets in. But that's where she found an actual client. So that's where you can find your buyers and sellers.
A sphere of influence is the first place I'd go. And if you've seen that, the 3 rapid fire lead generation Kickstarters report, that's a great place to start as well. And if you haven't got that report, you haven't seen that report, just go to straighttalkacademy.com, and there should be a pop-up where you can get that report. If not, just email me. You can email questions at straighttalkacademy.com or info@straighttalkacademy.com.
So to wrap that first question up too, What do you need for a listing appointment? You are going to want to go through the probably the marketing class is good for that. The multifamily marketing class as well. It's a separate class from the Foundation Essentials. That's good. It's got some tips on what you need. You're basically going to have to prepare a broker opinion of value or what the property's worth. You would run a CMA for a residential property where it pulls up comps. You're going to do something similar for your listing appointment. And I think do we have how to create a BOV up yet? Is that class up yet?
The BOV, yes, that one's live. And actually, I can just kind of jog over there and show you where that is. In case you're not sure where, if you just go to training.straighttalkacademy.com, go to the courses tab up at the top, and then you'll see the different courses. So creating an effective broker opinion and value right here.
Yeah.
Also, if you're new to the system and you're wondering where to start and how to navigate the website, I just put up this welcome start here first course. It's a quick 2-video screen share where I kind of walk you through the entire website platform so you can navigate through the system and through the training. Excellent. Just on a little side note.
Excellent.
But what looks like we've got our guest, Cindy Silva, and I'm going to throw her right on the line here.
Man.
So say hi, Cindy.
Good morning.
And you are a residential agent, and you are branching into the world of commercial. You're one of our students. And from what you've told me, you are just crushing it in real estate. I mean, how long have you been in the business for?
I've been in the business, in March will be 2 years.
2 years. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the successes that you've had? What are some of the accomplishments that you've gotten so far?
Some of the accomplishments is I've closed a lot of deals quicker than any other lender has done before. So we're very popular in closing stuff in 12 days,
wow.
Which was really great. Of course, trade came into effect, so we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Just all my properties, get them sold within the first month. And just, everything seems to go smooth, and then they refer me out. So just one success after another.
And it sounds like you have clients that are, I would call raving fans, or what's the other word for that? Just they believe in you 100%, and because of that, that's how you're going to grow your business.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. The key is being honest. People will trust you as long as you're honest. And if you don't know an answer, tell them you're going to find out the answer. It's better than making something up or just telling them you don't know.
I like it. That's the straight talk approach right there. I like your style, Cindy. And you also made masters, right? The masters list.
Yes, I did.
Was it Placer County Association or Sacramento?
Tri-County area.
Tri-County. So if you don't know where Tri-Counties is, it's the Sacramento, Placer, and El Dorado counties here in the Sacramento metropolitan area. Well, welcome, Cindy.
Thank you.
You're going to be our live guinea pig here for our office hours. And I've got some questions here, and I think you're actually familiar with some of these because you actually sent a couple of these questions in.
Yes.
And they're great questions, and then I'm also going to be switching back to the email just to see if any new questions came through. So please, nope, no new questions. So what I would say is, you see the screen? Go ahead and type in a topic that you want to discuss, and we'll get to it. So the first question that you emailed me today was, Steve keeps talking about in his videos getting to know your commercial appraiser. As commercial appraisers, are they different from residential appraisers? Because most residential appraisers will not talk to you and not want to be bothered.
That is the truth.
and you know what? I have seen a difference, and Dusty, you absolutely weigh in on this. And if Steve were here, he could weigh on it as well. But he was in the, I think he was in the hospital earlier this morning.
Fine.
Everything's fine, but so he couldn't make it to this meeting today. But we can certainly weigh in on that. And I would say it's a different world with the commercial appraisers. And I remember in residential, you wanted to kind of like sneak into the house, like come in the back door, the appraiser couldn't see you, and then you bring your comps and say, here's the comps, by the way, in case you can't have access to the MLS. And by the way, here's what I think the property is worth. Isn't that just great?
Yep. That's exactly how we do it.
And do they just kind of grow and just...
I've kind of figured out the way is trying to approach it as you're helping them. Like I like giving them a list of upgrades they might not know about or could not find on MLS. then it's a good way for them to talk to me. However, I can hand them the piece of paper sometimes, and it's like you're handing them a piece of poison. They'll run away and will not touch the paper and feel like you're persuading them in a certain direction. So, yeah, they're I don't want to say they're not friendly, but they do not want to talk to you in residential. That's for sure.
Well, with commercial, it's rare that we meet someone at the property. It's rare we meet an appraiser at the property, and usually it's a lot of things are done by phone communication or email communication, and the commercial appraisal process takes a lot longer than does a home. So where it may take a home appraiser a couple hours to do some research, a commercial appraisal can take a couple weeks or longer, depending on the scope of the transaction. And usually they're preparing 3 different valuations. If you've taken the Intro to Commercial Real Estate lesson, I think it's section 1, 2, or 3, where we talk about the different valuation methods. You've got the income. Okay, so section 2, you've got the income approach, you've got the comparative approach, and then you've got the replacement approach. So on commercial properties, they're going to do all 3, figure out which of the 3 is the most applicable to that property, and then give the value. But you're not going to sway a commercial appraiser. It's not going to happen. So they're not afraid of that if you do. In fact, they actually want from my experience, they actually want your opinions on certain matters.
From what I've seen, we actually have, whenever you close a commercial deal, you're actually going to get a call at some point within the next month from a or several commercial appraisers. You'll get a call from people who have databases like CoStar. They'll actually call and double check and find out the sales price. Getting comps in commercial is very difficult. Getting data is very difficult, and that's very valuable stuff. So if you will take those calls like we do and get to know the commercial appraisers, like Steve says, we actually have, I think, 3 now that have told us, look, you've helped us out 5, 10 times, and any details you need, if you need anything, we will get you valuations. They actually go out of their way at that point to help you. Now, depends on the area they focus. We've got, I think, one in Michigan. We've got one here in Sacramento, and then I forget where the third one's at. But they'll actually help you out. So they're actually they're kind of the opposite of residential. They want to talk to you. They want you to help them get comps, because it's tough to find those in commercial, because the sales price is public information, but what was the income, who was there, how long were the tenants there, all these details need to be filled out as well, and that's not public information. They actually have to call and talk to you for that. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
Absolutely. Well, I think that answers. Do you have any follow-up, Cindy, on that one?
My only question would be so for example, say someone has upgraded a commercial building. Would you supply an appraiser with a list of upgrades and how much they cost, as you would do if it was a residential property?
If those changes are not easily, if they're not stated anywhere else, usually you have like the full offering memorandum that you would put, and if you're most likely going to have that that nice offering memo posted online so that they're going to see the different changes, and they will usually do a walkthrough of the property. Now, depending on the property type, that may be feasible and may not be feasible.
Right.
But if it's like a vacant office building and the lender is local and the appraiser is local, they're probably going to take a look at it and see what condition that vacant office building is in.
So
Just to verify.
Just to add to that, there's 2 things are going to happen. You're going to have an appraisal on the property that you're working with, and in that case, you are going to give them absolutely everything. They're going to want to know all the details, and they're going to want to know those like 10 times over. So that's one part, but that appraiser is also going to go out and call the people who've sold property recently and get those comps for your subject property. And that's when you'll get the call, hey, you just sold this property a couple months ago. Can you tell me about that? And that's when you make friends with the appraisers. You tell them all about it, and you give them all the information they need and make their job easier.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's a nice symbiotic relationship we have.
Like that. We all don't have to be afraid of each other.
We help each other out, yeah. With residential, it was when I sold houses, I actually never met the appraisal. I actually never had problem with appraisals coming in at value. I think it was a different market than it is right now, but we were at the lowest prices of all time, really.
Right.
At least in my lifetime. So it was a little bit different time, but yeah. Okay. Question number 2 is, I don't feel very confident with commercial yet, with discussing commercial with clients or leads. What is the fastest way to get confidence in this arena? Dusty?
Well, I would say the same thing that I think Steve says. I don't know if he says it in the classes or not, but the way he got up to speed with things, and I did too, is by going on LoopNet and running an analysis, right? So we talk about how do you get listings. Well, you analyze a property, you tell someone what it's worth and why it's worth that. So you've got your comps, you've got their income, and you compare it all together and say, look, here's the range it could be, and here's why. And you get good at that by just doing those analysis over and over again. You don't have to have a buyer or a seller to do that. You can just go pull something down off LoopNet and just do the practice and try and find a good deal. And if you find one and you've analyzed one, maybe then you go in and say, hey, Mr. Buyer, I've got this cool deal. Look how awesome my analysis is. Do you want to buy it? And that could be kind of lead into actually finding buyers. But practicing is a good way to get good at that. And that's actually how I got good at commercial. And that's how before commercial I was working with an investment company that's focused on single-family homes. And I spent every single day looking at every new property that came on the market, every property that sold. I knew how much, I was really good at basically we were flipping property. And that was just from practice and repetition.
So you learn by doing is essentially, that's probably the best way to do, and learn by doing things that you can control. Like you can't, if you don't have a buyer, obviously you can't control, talking with a buyer about certain issues of the property, but becoming the market expert, just as, if you're a new residential agent, the first thing you're going to want to do is go on MetroList or the MLS, depending on where you are, and look at available properties, look at sold properties. Do your homework. If there's a trend map, you're going to look at all the trends. You're going to figure out, what the supply is, what the demand is, the average days on market, the average price per foot, that kind of thing in different areas, right? You're going to look in, you'll look in Sacramento, you'll look in Roseville, you'll look in Folsom, and to figure out kind of where the market is. Well, you can do the same thing with commercial. You just go onto LoopNet. And I think you can actually do it with a free account. Anytime you see a graph in LoopNet, you can click on it, and it'll bring you to like the graph master page where you can type in any location. You can type in, you can check different boxes for, supply, demand, days on market, online views, that whole thing. And that's a great place to start. But it reminds me of a saying I just heard from Zig Ziglar. Now I've got his audiobook in my on my iPhone right now, and I play in my car to get my mind right for 2016. And he says, "Be before you can do, and you need to do before you can have." It all starts with be. And so I think that kind of ties in with the whole confidence piece. Is you have to be confident in order to really take it to the next level and do the activities that are required to make hopefully a lot of money for your real estate career. So the first thing is to gain confidence by learning and by practicing, essentially. Cindy, what do you have any thoughts on this whole thing?
Yeah, I was just curious. So, on the residential side, we go to a lot of open houses. I definitely agree with Dusty. I did exactly what he did. I knew every single thing that hit the market, what it sold for. You just analyze. But then on the residential side, also every free moment I had, I was out touring houses. I was going to open houses, just getting familiar with what each town has to offer and what, say $400,000 will get you in each town. Now for for commercial, how would you do that? For example, so you're trying to find comps. Would a Denny's and an Applebee's be the same kind of comp? I mean, are all restaurants grouped in general? Like, how do you get familiar with what to comp your building against?
Certainly. And there's different, there's going to be different sectors or different subtypes within each property type. So, for example, if you're talking about a single tenant net lease property like a Denny's or an Applebee's, those would be considered kind of those would be a restaurant, right? Well, you've also got single tenant triple net leases that are banks. You've got them that are maybe their office buildings or maybe their corporate, small corporate headquarters, or there's different categories even within that, and there's different cap rates for each little subtype of triple net lease properties.
Tenant, yeah. That'll come with practice. That's one of those things that comes with practice. That's one of the reasons you want to be focused on probably one property type, because it can be so complicated. That's just one type of retail, and it's hugely just different kind of cap rates, depends on the tenant.
Let me add something in here. So I've got a magazine. It's the Commercial Investment Real Estate Magazine, and it's basically CCIM's magazine that goes out. And they've actually published a chart with the national average cap rates by product. Check this out, Cindy. So single tenant net lease product, we've got cap rates anywhere from 7.5 all the way down to sub 6, right? So at the very bottom of the cap rate, they've got banks. So we're talking about high value first, right? Banks, convenience stores, restaurants, drugstores, auto stores, and discount stores. So based on the different type of business, it can affect the cap rate. Now, how would you know that? Well, first of all, you'd have to do your research on, okay, well, why is Wells Fargo net lease property selling at a 6 cap when I can go get a Denny's at 7.5 cap? Why is that? So there's some resources out there. First of all, we talked about LoopNet. And second of all, you can get industry publications. Now, I actually got this from a friend, but there's different magazines and publications that you can get that talk about commercial real estate and trends and things that are going on in the industry. Just like the Real Estate Magazine, the Realtor Magazine, all those other publications. You can find similar publications with commercial. And you can use the Google machine too if you need to type in something specific.
That is actually a fantastic way to learn. If you don't know something, just type what you don't know into Google, and there's tons of information out there, and it'll spit out the answer. And that's actually how I learned a lot more about retail, is by just Googling it. I was like, okay, well, what this person was telling me, rent to sales ratio, right? And when I first started, I had no idea what that was, and it's very important for retail. And a rent to sales ratio, I just typed it into Google and it pops right up. The rent to sales ratio is basically the percentage of rent as opposed to the gross sales, right? So if the gross sales are $1 million and I've got 6.5% rent to sales ratio, that means 6.5% of my gross sales are what my rent is every year. Okay?
Or should be.
Or should be, right?
Right.
So there's a health, and I found out there's a healthy range for a Denny's to be in. There's a healthy range for a Wells Fargo to be in. Those are different product types within single tenant at least. And I found out that, oh, cool. So within 6 to 8% of their gross sales is a healthy rent for a Denny's to be in. Right? You can Google all that stuff, and it's very easy to find the information. So that is another quick way to get up to speed on that stuff.
Every time I ask Dusty for something, he says, "Have you Google it first?" Oh,
Yep.
shoot, I got to Google it. I Google a lot, but I think Dusty Googles more than me.
Now, Dusty, you did mention to start with one category and focus on that.
Yes.
What would you suggest starting with?
Multifamily.
Multifamily.
Every time. It's so similar to houses, and the tenants are the same as housing tenants. It's a lot easier to get started and digest that. It's also the highest competition because of that, because you've got a lot of residential agents that have learned a little bit of multifamily, and now they're doing that too. So it's kind of a give and take. So I would start there.
Okay.
Where you go from there, it depends on what you like. The single tenant net lease stuff that we're talking about is more of a bond-like property. If you have a lot of investors, maybe older investors that are looking to retire, that's probably a good place for them to go.
Okay.
So it depends on who you're talking to and what your sphere of influence is.
Okay.
Yeah, if you've got a bunch of friends who are, startup entrepreneurs and they're going to need office space, and you've got all these friends who are building businesses, maybe you want to jump into the office sector for growing companies and figure out where the hot new spaces are and what those are going for, so you can have that conversation with your friends saying, wow, if you're starting up this software as a service company, you should probably be in this demographical area or excuse me, geographical area, excuse me, like Silicon Valley or Palo Alto or San Jose or something. So that something like that would be a good example.
Again, sphere of influence. So if you are like in the residential business, you dealt with construction a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you could actually go into. You probably know a lot about maybe building a retail center.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that type of stuff? I don't think we've asked you before.
No,
So mostly homes.
Mostly homes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's fine too. You can go in and just work with developers. You probably have a ton of business already in your book ready to go. People looking for properties to acquire. I deal with developers too, and we've got, I think, a guy with 350 lots that he's trying to sell right now. You could go in and find people who want to buy stuff and just deal that way. That would be a good transition for you, probably would be, rather than multifamily or net lease stuff, transitioning into that field, because that's a very lucrative field, is the land development.
Got you.
Yeah.
And how do you go about, for example, Marysville? There's a lot of talk that Marysville is going to be doubling in size and expanding a lot.
Yeah.
So obviously there's going to be a lot of commercial, a lot of residential that there would be possibly adding. How do you go and how do you find out if it's going through, how to approach them, and how to get your leg in the door for that kind of community?
So if you're listening, Marysville is a tertiary market in California outside of Sacramento. So if you took the first intro classes, it's one of the smaller markets, but it is going to grow. Next to Marysville is an Air Force base that is scheduled to double in size here pretty soon. One of the things that you may or may not know is they over-approved lots up there. There's like 10,000 houses waiting to be built up there in Oroville and Marysville, these little properties up there, cities up there. So one way to discover what's going to happen is talk to city planners. In Sacramento, I've got a list of every single city planner and where they specialize in. So there's North Sacramento, South Sacramento, downtown. I know who to call with whatever question I have. So if I'm wondering what's going on with the downtown arena, we've got a large development in downtown Sacramento, I can call Linda, I think, in downtown Sacramento development, and just talk to her. So developing a relationship with the planners is a good way to find out what's coming down the pipe. You can go online, and any permit, like if Walmart wanted to go in somewhere, you'll know a couple of years ahead of time because they'll have submitted permits to build that commercial there.
Okay.
So that's a good way too, is go online, and they've actually got a list of even if it's single family homes, every development permit that's been submitted, you can go and find out who submitted it, what it's for, and where it's at.
Gotcha. So got to do a little digging.
Do a little digging. That's a good way. Land bankers, people who buy and just hold on to land, they'll go in and find, oh, Walmart's going in there. I'm going to buy across the street. I'm going to buy this. And if you were to go out there, it would just be a bunch of land. But Walmart's going in there in 3 years. I'm going to go buy this land dirt cheap, wait till they build it, and then sell it for like 10 times the profit.
Absolutely. Okay. That's great to know.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we got that question handled. Let's move on to the next one. Let's talk about some issues and some troubles. All right. So what are the top issues that I should be aware of as a new commercial real estate broker or agent? So I've got a list of things that you probably want to take into consideration. And some of these are causes of future problems that you obviously don't want. So I've got two categories. I've got the serious kind of areas where, or the areas where serious infractions happen, and I've got one that's more of having egg on your face or appearing as as an amateur rookie that can kind of maybe damage your reputation as opposed to get you in legal trouble, that kind of thing. So I'll just kind of read through these and we can discuss as we go, Dusty.
Perfect.
All right, so the serious areas that end up in trouble is we've got valuations. So, obviously giving the wrong property valuation can be a huge problem in the future if you grossly undervalued something.
Right.
Of course, if you overvalued something and it didn't really sell, that's not going to really hurt you. But if you say the property is worth $1 million and it's really worth $2 million, you could be in for some.
Yeah, Steve talks about that in the very first class. I think he's the guy who I think it was like an eightplex that his buddy, or someone he knows.
Oh, you're talking about Bob. Bob in the eightplex.
Agent Bob. Yeah. So that could happen, but that's also a big fear too, right? What if I go to value a property for a client? I'm new. I go to value a property for a client, and I don't. What if I overvalue it and it just sits on the market for 10 months? What if I undervalue it? That's a big fear. One of the things that you can do if you're listening to this, if you're a member, we have a forum that's for that type of stuff. You can submit a letter of intent or something like that, like an evaluation you've put together, and we'll take a look at it. This is why you're here, is so you can get some education and actually get some input and some support. So if you're in a situation like that and you're kind of not really sure what to do, go on the forum and ask a question, or go to office hours like right now and ask a question, because we can help.
Yeah, send over some points maybe you're having issues on in the questions at Straight Talk Academy, and we'll see if we can help you out.
Can I add a quick thing in?
Yeah, sure.
I just noticed you were saying, so you were talking about knowing your property's value. In commercial, is there no such thing as a price decrease? Like, for example, residential, we know when we're going at top dollar, but if it doesn't sell in 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to break it down to here in another 2 to 3 weeks. They'll know there's a range of price.
Absolutely. When we present our broker opinion of value, and you'll see that if you go to the class that we just showed you earlier, it goes over this. When I present that, it'll have a range. It'll show them. Usually we deal with income property mostly. We don't usually deal with owner users. So I wouldn't be dealing with an attorney that has just, his office. But when we're dealing with income property, I've got a range. I say, look, the comps I've shown you have this range. Depending on where we price it, here's where your property lands, so they can see, look, if I price it too high, it's going to be way over market. What I also do is I tell them the average days on market for this is at the median price is 180 days. Mm-hmm. If you go above, which we can do, you just be aware that's going to be longer, right? So the higher we price it, the longer it's going to be. The lower we price it on this range, the quicker it's going to sell. So it depends on what you want to do. So if we do price it too high, we do prepare them that, look, we knew this was going to happen. Let's do a price drop. Depends on what you want to do. So I let the client actually decide, what do they want to do? Do they want to sell it in 10 years, or do they want to sell it in the next 6 months or 3 months?
Gotcha. So very similar to the residential then.
And it's always smart to have those price drop levels up front if you can. Say, look, if we don't have any action within 2 months, Mr. Seller, I know your goals are to get it sold within 6 months. If we don't have any action within 2 months, we need to be prepared at that time to do a price reduction to X dollars, and have that, maybe even put it in your listing agreement, or maybe not. It depends on the situation, but having that conversation and setting those expectations up front, I think, is huge.
One of the tools I use for that, for price drops, if we're going to talk about that, is the quarterly report. If you go, I know it's in our tools and resources, but I'm trying to think of the class that'll give that to you. Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't.
It's basically a quarterly report that I do, and it tells them, here's how many people we've talked to, here's all the marketing we've created, and it shows them how much we work for them, because sometimes they don't know how much we work behind the scenes, and then it'll show them where the property's at, how many interested buyers we have, and I'll talk to them about the challenges maybe that the property is facing, and that'll be when I propose either we do a price drop, we be prepared that it stays on the market for a while, et cetera, et cetera. It depends on what I want to do with that, but that's where I'll propose a price drop, and I'll just sit down with them, look, here's the details, here's the facts, what do you want to do?
Yeah, that's a great place to put your feedback from other agents and brokers
Absolutely.
without having to say, look, Mr. Seller, your property stinks. No one wants it. Well, you can say, this particular broker said this, it's overpriced. This particular broker says it's overpriced. This particular broker says, X, Y, and Z, and that way you've got a...
it's not you saying it, it's the other agent.
Exactly.
That's very helpful. Yeah.
Okay, so valuations are important to nail down, and we know why. The next one is if you're a realtor and you are not abiding by the code of ethics. Obviously, I think we beat that dead horse in the first module, so we won't need to discuss that one.
Just one point on that. I did have one of our students he wasn't sure what to do on that point. There are properties that have expired. They are off the MLS perhaps. Maybe they were valued wrong. Maybe they were valued too much, or they weren't marketed right. He was wondering what was appropriate as far as approaching the owner. We do talk about how sometimes the agents don't respond to us. Maybe we call them. There's a notorious piece of land over here in Sacramento that Steve references in the classes where for like 10 months he was calling the agent, who's a top agent, on that listing, on that property, and he never got a call back. So when is it appropriate to go past the agent? You don't want to, if you can avoid it, you don't want to do that. When the listing is up, it's kind of free game. But if they're not calling you back like that, it's perfectly okay. It's considered okay. It's ethical from our point of view to just go around them and say, hey, Mr. Owner, I'm trying to get a hold of your agent. What do I do?
Haven't been able to.
Yeah. Don't try and steal the listing. That was his question. Like, can I steal it? Don't try and do that. In commercial, I think there's about 300 commercial agents in our marketplace. There's several thousand residential agents, so it's a very small community. Even nationally, you will find you're going to deal with the same people over and over again. So don't try and step on people's toes. But yes, if you face a situation like that, you can, just go find the owner's name, send them a letter, say, hey, you got a listing here, I can't reach your agent. Call me, or have him call me, or her call me.
They may say that listing expired 3 years ago, and that darn agent won't get a sign off my property.
Yep, that happens too.
That happens all the time. So you can make those calls if you need to. Next one, MLS MLS non-submission. If you are a member of an MLS, an actual MLS, a lot of commercial agents and brokers are not members of the MLS, so they don't actually get a non-MLS submission form. But if you are a member of the MLS and you take a commercial listing, and if you're not going to put it on the MLS, you need to do a non-MLS submission form.
Yeah. Which, if you're a member, you're probably going to throw it on there usually.
It can't
Unless
hurt.
It's a higher end property. Usually, you're going to see that past $5 million, you're not really going to see it on the MLS. It's just you're going to get a lot of calls that are going to spin your wheels usually.
We've got one listing, Dusty, that it's a lot more than 5, but because it's a rare exception that we have it on the MLS, and in this particular area, this geographical location, actually you have to have it on the MLS because that's what everyone uses, no matter if they're residential or commercial. So you got those little exceptions in certain
areas.
And
in that one, that property, that's a vineyard. So it's actually, and it's in Napa, so it's kind of, even though it's a high price listing, it's actually kind of standard for that. It's like in Beverly Hills, you're going to have everything on the MLS, but it's going to be way expensive stuff.
Yeah. Okay, another serious infraction is making promises or verbal slip-ups, as I say. So saying something maybe to close a deal when when it's not quite the truth, or if it's possibly misrepresented, that's not a good thing. For example, if you say, Mr. Client, look, the taxes are only going to be X amount of dollars, it's not that big of a deal. Go ahead and sign here and let's close. Well, you're not a tax professional, so you should not be giving tax advice. You're not a legal professional, so you should not be giving legal advice.
Yep.
So just be careful to practice within what you're legally and fiduciarily allowed to practice. Any comments on that, guys?
Yeah, that's
Now I'm still kind of blown away that there's only 300 commercial agents considering just in Placer County. We have almost 10,000 residential agents just in Placer County.
Yeah.
Why do you think, why is the rate so low? Do you think a lot of people, what causes people to fail in commercial? Because that is a huge difference, 300 versus almost 10,000 in
Right.
one county.
So a lack of knowledge.
Okay.
Okay, so up until, until we came out with what we have here, there hasn't been a lot of support from anywhere. So a lack of knowledge is one part, and then not being committed to it is another part. So people will kind of do commercial. You have to do commercial. You have to, or just be very focused on one property type. You'll see people kind of dabble in it, and then they just decide to do residential or go away from it. It does take a longer time to get successful in commercial, so that could be it too.
Okay.
Another thing is a lot of the commercial-only firms, as you know, there's, you've got your Keller Williams, your Century 21s, your Remaxes that are mostly residential. And then you've got the commercial brokerages like, CBRE, NAI, Newmark, Knight, Grubb. You've got these pure commercial firms, and then you've got, the kind of the in-betweeners or the small brokerages. Maybe it's, like a KW commercial, or it's a Remax commercial, or it's just a smaller brokerage that handles both. There seems to be, when you go to more of the big houses, there's a lot more requirements in order to get in. So like for CBRE, I believe you have to have like a 4-year degree, and then you have to be basically an intern as a junior agent under a senior agent for a period of time before you can actually accept clients as your own. Now, I believe that's true, but in most of the pure commercial firms, whether on residential side, mostly if you can just get your license, most brokerage houses will accept that just because they're in the numbers game, right? Well, commercial firms aren't necessarily quite in the agent numbers game. They're in the production quality game, because they're dealing with high net worth individuals, so they want to make sure they screen people well. So I think that's one of the barriers. And I think a lot of residential agents get into commercial because they're more analytically focused. They're more numbers based. They like the idea of maybe working with business owners and entrepreneurs, and they like the financial aspects of it. And they like a little bit more, or the less, the residential world is kind of like the more of the casual approach, right? Where everything is very casual and it's very friendly. Mm-hmm. And then the commercial side's a little bit different. It's not quite as casual and friendly. Some people just naturally gravitate towards that, but it seems to be a smaller number of people that do. So I think those are some contributing factors as well.
Yeah.
Okay, next one is the binding versus non-binding language and letters of intent. Dusty, you've seen it. Letters of intent that didn't have a non-binding clause. Maybe they were 1 or 2 pages, and they looked easy enough to sign, but at the end of the day, is that something that you want, or is that something that you want to counter and put in that non-binding language in that letter of intent?
So one of the I've actually had a letter of intent that didn't have the non-binding language, didn't have any language in it like that at all, and it was actually sent to us from a 30-year commercial real estate agent. He's been in the business for 30 years. He sent over an offer. It was supposed to be a letter of intent, and it was, without that language, it can be considered a contract. And it was in our favor, and we fixed it. We didn't take advantage of that because that would just cause a mess. But you always want to have that non-binding language in your letter of intent. Make sure it's approved by your broker and their legal counsel. We do have a sample of it that we give you guys in the letter of intent. But again, we make sure it's approved by your broker first. We're not in the business to get you in trouble or know what they're going to approve or not approve. So make sure you run it by them first. Always have that language in there first.
Exactly. Okay. Next one is adhering to timelines. And specifically contract timelines and even timelines within the letter of intent to get certain contracts out. Usually in the letter of intent, you'll have a period of time in which you need to get a contract drafted. So you just want to be careful to make those timeline commitments that are in the letter of intent and the contract. For all the inspections and the reports and all the due diligence materials. Contingency removals. I've noticed a lot of contingency removals are passive and they're not active. So in residential, at least on the CAR forms, the contingencies have to be removed actively via a removal of contingency form or an addendum or something like that. In commercial, you have to read the language because it could be either, and you don't want to misconstrue that, or else that could end you up in some hot water when all of a sudden your buyer is now required to let go of his $50,000 deposit because they thought they had one more day and they had not removed contingencies actively, and they come from a residential investing world where that's the norm, so they expected it to be the norm when the actual case was it was passive removal of contingencies.
So just to clarify, with passive, when you're talking about passive or active, passive removal means that in the contract it says it happens on X day. Contingencies aren't removed, just contingency expires on 35 days out, 10 days out. And when that happens, either way the escrow is going to have you sign something that says we remove contingencies, but from a legal standpoint, you're probably going to be in a little bit of trouble if you don't have that active language and you just let it go.
I remember a case in point where a buyer, I don't know if they realized it was the contingencies were up, but they ended up having to pay 5 figures in deposit money because they went past their due diligence timeline.
Is that the Texas Apartments you're thinking of?
It might have been. It just might have been. Maybe some other reasons, but
Cool.
Again, that's a good point.
Cool case in point on that one. We had the seller on that, and the buyer was in there, and they let their contingency period expire, and they thought they could just take their money and leave. And actually, they never had put their money into escrow. They had told us they did, and they kept avoiding it. And at the end of the day, they had to write actually a check to the seller. And I don't know if you know this, Steve, but that person who had to write that check actually called us up last week and said, I would like you to sell our property. And I want you to protect me the way you protected the seller in that last deal.
Wow.
I did not know that.
They called us
That's
just
awesome.
last week. So do your clients a favor and be a bulldog if you have to.
Is there standard timelines for stuff like contingency removal in commercial, like there is in residential, where we have our 17 days for inspections and appraisal, 21 days for loan? Are there set guidelines for commercial, or is it case by case?
Yes and no. Depending on the form you use, the contract form you use, it depends on what the contract is. Basically, there could be 10 different forms of contracts that are used. It could be one, it could be a CAR form, it could be an AIR form, it could be a contract prepared by an attorney. So you want to make sure you read it, but in a more of a standard in more of a standard contract, they're going to have days already written in there. Now you can cross them out and replace the days whatever you'd like, or
I'd say
what's agreeable in the LOI.
It depends on if it's a cash offer or a financed offer. It depends on how complicated the subject property is. So if it's, like a really big retail center with, a Safeway and a whole bunch of little tiny tenants, and there's all these moving parts, that might extend out your due diligence period, but it is kind of a case by case. The forms are going to have something boilerplate in there. But on a practical note, you're going to take a look at it and say, how do we want to present this offer? If we're cash, and depending on the seller's hot buttons, do we want to have a 10-day or 5-day due diligence period and then a 14-day close? How, is that going to help us get the deal cheaper or whatnot?
And is it realistic?
Yeah.
And that whole thing. So if you've got, 20 tenants that you need to get estoppel certificates from, a 5-day due diligence is probably not going to work.
Right. So the seller at that case would say, what are you doing? Let's do 20 Mondays. It's fine.
Yeah. And if you need a loan, please call the lender and ask them an estimated timeline to get the loan before you write the contract. So if you write a 30-day or 40-day, loan contingency provision, and the lender ends up not being able to satisfy that within 90 days, you want to know that up front. So always talk to a lender before you actually put in financing timelines, because you want to know obviously what the average timeline is to get the loan to where it needs to be.
Yeah, depending on the product type, loans will take longer or shorter, and also the lender you're using too may or may not be familiar. They're the same as residential agents. They may not be familiar with commercial, and they may try and take down a loan that they're not really qualified for. That could happen. So make sure you use the right lender too.
Dusty, I'm going to add that on my next column here, using the right lender. And it looks like we're getting close on time, so if we go past 12 o'clock, looks like we will go past 12 o'clock, so I want to get through these. So we'll just continue on. If you need to leave at 12, then that's fine. If not, stick around and we'll continue on that. So I'm just writing the note here. Okay, the next one, let's just go through these semi-quickly here. The next one is thorough due diligence. So we kind of touched on that before, is you want to know what kind of due diligence you're doing, and you want to know about the right timelines it's going to take to get that due diligence done. Yep. Just like with these estoppel certificates, if you only need to get 3, it's not going to take you very long. If you need to get 300 because you've got a 300-unit apartment complex,
just take longer.
Yeah, you may need to bring in some help with that.
Yeah. Another point, we talked about the guy who's, and I'm sorry, I keep extending out.
Keep going too long, Dusty. Gosh.
The guy we talked about who sent that LOI over that didn't have the disclosure or the non-binding language, that was also, he's a 30-year agent. He's been doing multifamily for forever, for longer, almost as long as I've been alive. And he did not want to do estoppel certificates. He said he never did them. And if you don't know what estoppel certificates are, those are basically a contract, not really a contract, but it's a disclosure that goes to the tenant and it goes to the landlord separately. They both fill out basically what the lease agreement is and confirm what it is, and then they turn that in. So they both kind of double confirmed that there's no secret handshake, that just because tenant in 17B puts up the Christmas lights every year, he gets, December rent off, It makes sure that the tenant then, after close of escrow, can't come and say, hey, I'm supposed to get December rent off every year because I put the Christmas lights up. So that's what they're for, and it's just you always want to do estoppels no matter what.
Perfect. So that's what I have in my serious category. I'm sure there's others that we haven't thought of, but it comes down with the serious ones. You just want to make sure you know what you're doing. You just don't want to get yourself in trouble. Now on the other column I have is more of the amateurish mistakes, or mistakes that maybe will look bad on you versus getting you in the hot seat of legal trouble. The first one I have is showings. So just knowing how to show and if you need to show certain properties and what the protocol is for that. Case in point, this vineyard listing. Someone called basically Monday and wanted to go see it today and ended up showing showing up on the front steps of the property, with an entourage of half a dozen people, when they had no business being there, and it ended up wasting a lot of people's time and looking horrible.
One thing, you're going to have sometimes properties that have a non-disclosure agreement. So for instance, this vineyard, he doesn't want his employees or the people who contract with him to know it's for sale. Otherwise, he could lose his contracts, lose his employees. So everyone has to sign a non-disclosure that they're not going to do anything they're not authorized to do. They're not going to tell anyone about it or speak about this or share anything with anyone. And this agent calls us. He gets a non-disclosure sign, and then he just shows up today at the site, at the foreman's house. And luckily the foreman knew it was for sale. But like this, he basically blew himself out of the water by doing an amateur mistake like that. He just kind of bullied in there and saw the property. So he's put himself in a pretty poor position negotiating wise, where we're not taking him too seriously because he doesn't really know what he's doing, it seems. So make sure you know when to and when not to show. When a good point on showing property is, if it's vacant, if it's an owner-user building, that's fine. If it's an investment property and you have tenants in there, most of the time you're not going to really want to do that until you're under contract. We go over that in the class. There's a certain time, there's a certain way in which you go about things. It's a little bit different than residential.
Right. All right. Using the wrong purchase and sale agreements. So, for example, instead of sending over a letter of intent first, and you send over a California residential purchase agreement when it's a multifamily or a 5-unit property. If you're going to send a contract, make sure it's the right contract made for that property type. I know AAR has a land purchase agreement. It has a multi-tenant retail purchase agreement. It has a multifamily purchase agreement, and just a standard commercial industrial purchase agreement. So just using the right form, so you don't look like a rookie, basically. To put it nicely, that's just the truth of it. The next one is LOI versus purchase sale agreement or a contract. So again, if you're talking to the agent, ask him or her, what kind of offer do they want? Ask them, hey, do you want me to send over an LOI, or you just want to go straight to contract? They may say, let's just go straight to contract, send it over. Yep. In which case, boom, you do that. Some case they may just say, well, let's just start with an LOI and see where that goes. Yeah, boom. Now you know which direction.
Depends on how close you are on terms and price and stuff like that. If you're a little bit far away and there's a lot of stuff to negotiate, they're probably going to want a letter of intent. That's usually how you start. If it's pretty much, like an agreed
cut and paste,
they're just going to want to go to contract usually.
Yeah. Okay. Amateur move number 4 is marketing in the wrong places or lack thereof marketing. So again, if you're just on the MLS, I think by now you don't want to be on the MLS itself. You want to be on all the other commercial databases that you need to be, and put together the marketing that we show you in both the Foundation Essentials and the additional courses under the Courses tab of the website.
Absolutely.
Amateur move, again, proper education, both on your part and when you're giving clients information and teaching them. Steve says that he was, for 6 months of his career, he was telling people the wrong definition of what a cap rate was, until he actually learned what it was and decided, oops, and changed. So then he became very clear on what he said before he said it. So obviously that was 15 years ago when he was young and spry and just getting into the business. But the same goes. You want to make sure you know what you're talking about, because you obviously don't want to tell someone a cap rate is the gross, basically the gross rent multiplier. When the client knows better, they're going to say, "Oh, this guy doesn't do commercial. Why am I even talking to him?"
It's okay to say you don't know, and it's much preferred. We were talking about honesty. It's way better to say, let me check on that. I want to make sure I give you the right information, than to just do a best guess. It's way better.
Exactly. Amateur, I have appearance. Obviously looking unkept and not in the right attire for the situation. There's times when you need to be suited up. There's times when you don't need to be suited up or business casual. But generally meeting with a client in flip-flops is probably not a good idea. Unless you're on the beach looking at
Right.
office buildings in Maui. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, it depends on the situation. With the vineyard listing, again, most of the time, the agents that deal with those are not going to be suited up. They're just going to be in kind of business casual. We still usually suit up just because that's what we do. That's how we like to present ourselves. But be presentable, be professional, to add to that, I'd probably say, do what you say you're going to do, and be on time, just be professional. It's going
And
to go
show
a long
up.
way.
And when you show up, show up. I think I got that from Grant Cardone. In fact, his accent is wearing on me right now. But show up like no one else. If your client is, dressed like, well, let's always dress a little bit nicer than your clients, right? That's like the general rule. Is you're always one step. If they're business casual, you're just slightly above business casual. If they're in a suit and tie, then you better be in a suit and tie. If they're in flip-flops, then you can wear boat shoes.
Yeah, rule of thumb in this business, always better to be overdressed than underdressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Next point is have the tough conversations if you need to. And usually you'll need to have the tough conversations or fierce conversations, depending on what book you read. But be prepared that if you need to give bad news, then you gotta just give the bad news, and don't put it off. Eat your frog first, I think, as Brian Tracy says. Okay, and then our last one here is using the wrong lender. So obviously you don't want to go through the whole process, and I'm going to just pick on Bank of America here. If someone from Bank of America says, yeah, we do single tenant net lease retail in Michigan, and it turns out that they don't really do it, but they might do it, and the lender really just wants the business, but they have no real way to actually execute, and you could have just wasted your time versus finding a lender maybe from referral sources or from someone who knows that particular product type, and finding the right lender who actually does that. Maybe it's Triple Net Lease Lenders Incorporated, and that's all they do is that particular lender. So you just want to find the right lender for that right particular property type.
That's another opportunity for you to go on the forums and ask the community. If you have a question about that, or anything really, just go on, Google it. I like Googling it. But
Check the reviews too.
go on the forum and ask, and you'll get the answers you're looking for.
Absolutely. So I believe that concludes that question. Now, I did receive another question on the email from Sylvia. So let's go ahead and read that here. What kind of insurance should a new commercial agent obtain to protect him or herself from possible lawsuits due to unintentional negligence in contract negotiations? I know my residential brokers carries E&O, but I seriously doubt it would be sufficient for a commercial building. I know that I can purchase additional E&O on my own to increase coverage. I was wondering if the same applies to commercial. And back to that, I think the second question right there is, I know my residential broker carries E&O, but I doubt it would be sufficient. Well, the first thing you would want to do is you would want to ask them.
Yeah.
And if your broker doesn't know, they can give you the contact information for the E&O provider to see if that is a property type, or if that's a direction that they will actually support. Now, Dusty, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've seen from E&O insurance providers is they usually can protect transactions more of like on a ratio basis. So, for example, you can do up to 5% of the deals of commercial versus residential. So, an office is allowed, if they do, maybe $100 million in volume, they're allowed to go up to, like, say, $5 million if it's 5% of commercial, and there's still coverage protection.
Yeah, I don't know if that's confusing or not, but yes, your typical E&O will cover up to a small percentage of your deals being commercial. So, you want to check with the carrier. Sometimes, I know at the brokerage that we were at before we started our own company, their E&O insurance absolutely covered commercial because it was a very large office. So it was just fine. We didn't have to do anything. You may have to purchase additional E&O. There are ways to do E&O where it's actually a per transaction fee for commercial. You could do that as well. But you will actually have to probably call your own E&O and just find out what their options are and go from there. If you have some trouble still after you talk to your own E&O insurance, probably post in the forums, and we can help you find someone that might work.
Yeah, and so talk to your broker first. They should know, or the office manager should know, and then you can also follow it up with the E&O provider secondly.
Yeah.
So I know that you can. You can purchase. You should be able to purchase additional a commercial E&O. Dusty, you remember that company that handles the E&O that we looked into? Was it Lloyd? It was Lloyd's something.
I don't remember.
Was it Lloyd's of London or something?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I want to say Lloyd's of London.
That was the per transaction one that you're thinking of. Is that?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
I believe it was Lloyd's something. I'm sure we could Google and find it. And I think there might have been another question. Let me go back. Oh, okay. So it's we got a follow up from Sylvia. Oops, I meant to say a new salesperson or a new commercial real estate agent. It seems the agent should be prepared ahead of writing any letters of intent to prospective clients.
Yep.
Yeah.
So same answer.
Yeah, I would say talk to your broker about doing commercial real estate. I imagine you might have had that conversation already with your broker, saying, hey, I'm looking into commercial real estate. Is this something that I can do? That probably should be the first question that you ask before you start doing any commercial-based activities, and see if there's any opposition to it.
Do we have any other questions? We're about 10 minutes over.
I don't have any other questions, unless Cindy, you have any last-minute topics, comments, questions, concerns?
No, I feel this was really helpful.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and sign off here. So we will see you in just a couple weeks. I believe the next one that we're going to do, let me see here. Let me just try to get you a day.
Today's the 5th.
Oh, hold on. I'm here in June, May. I'm doing my year in advance here. Hold on. Okay. So we're at the 5th. So the next one is going to be the Tuesday, the 26th, and I'll update the website as well. So it'll be the 26th, and I'll send out some reminder emails as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.